Hello everyone. My name is Samuel. I'm part of the AI team of CloudWalk, and today is my turn to present here at the Paper Club. I chose to present the paper GPTs are GPTs, an early look on at the labor market impact potential of large language models. So the idea of presenting this paper is like following the hype of Chat-GPT, and the last presentation was talking about the impact of language models in the academic research, so I thought that may be a good topic to follow. So the idea of the paper is basically to see how much impact large language models can have on jobs and the economy. The study focus on the US market, but I think we can like assume some global conclusions, even though it was focused on the US. So the paper is quite long. They spend a lot of time like talking about the methodology they did and explaining some stuff. I would just like talk a little bit about how they did it and then go to the results. And then after, maybe we can talk a little bit about, discuss a little bit about what they conclude here. So the motivation of this study was not only by GPT itself, but for what other technologies developing around GPT are enable people to do. And throughout the paper, it's clear that applications made for specific use cases are what apparently shows most potential of impact, not the large language model itself. When they launched the integration of ChatGPT with Wolfram, I was watching the live that they did, and some guy there said that developing integrations and applications for stuff like GPT would be like developing apps for App Store or Play Store, so it would be something like that. I don't know if that will be like actually what will happen, but I think there's a lot of potential to be something like that. And okay, so talking about the methodology they did, how they analyze. So they got a lot of occupations, like job descriptions that they have in the US, and then they divided these job descriptions into a lot of tasks, and then they create a new rubric that measures the overall exposure to large language models, or to those tasks through large language models. So basically they create like this, let me find here, these three levels of exposure. So E0 is no exposure, E1 is direct exposure to Chat-GPT, so only Chat-GPT can help solving the task, and the E2 is Chat-GPT plus another software that can be developed to complement it. So we have these three levels of exposure, and they basically use the E1 and E2 to calculate like three coefficients here, alpha, beta, and gamma. And the first one is only GPT. The second is basically simplifying this GPT plus something of another software. And the third level is GPT plus another software. So, and like it's important to notice that they don't distinguish between labor augmented and labor displacements when they talk about exposure. So being exposed doesn't mean that you'll be replaced. It can be the case that your productivity will be boosted, for example. And let me see what else. And to classify the level of exposure to each task, they use both humans and GPT-4 to like get the annotations of how exposure some tasks is to language models or not. So, and GPT and the humans tend to agree most of the time. So that's something something nice to notice as well. But there are some limitations like when doing that, and they said that this exposure measure reflects an estimate of technical capability to make human labor more efficient. However, social, economic, regulatory, and other determinants imply that technical feasibility does not guarantee labor productivity. So yeah, that's it. And like they mentioned a little bit more limitations that they found in the study, that maybe you don't list all the tasks required for the job to be done. Maybe you don't they don't differentiate the weights of the task. So maybe there is a task that's much more important and then the other, but they don't differentiate that. And to judge if a task can be done by a model, you probably need someone that has knowledge in that field. So that's something that they missed as well, because they don't have an expert in every field to judge the tasks. And there is human bias as well. So people may, because of their background, they may think that ChatGPT couldn't write poems, replace poets, because poets have this feeling, and then someone might think that they can. So there's human bias as well that can influence the study. So that was basically the methodology they did and the weakness that they mentioned, and talking a little bit about the results that they got it. I think to talk about the results is nice to show first this chart here. I don't know if you guys can see pretty clear, but yeah, you have the three coefficients that I mentioned earlier: the alpha for human, the alpha for model, the beta for human, and then goes on. And then you have here the level of the minimal percentage of exposure tasks per percentage of occupations. So in the first level, it's the circle here, humans and the model agree around 5% of people of occupations have 40% of their tasks exposed using only ChatGPT. But what I thought was interesting to notice here is that the huge increase that you got from one level to another. So you goes up to almost 5% here, and then if you add some complementary software, it goes up to almost 40%, and then if you add more of that complementary software, it goes up to 60%. So that was for me the most interesting part. Is not because ChatGPT alone, the exposure level is not that much of a big deal, but if you as you add more complementary software around it, it becomes much more the level of exposures increases a lot. So I don't know, that's something interesting. And they talk, another interesting stuff is talking about wages, and the level of exposure depending on the wages of the person. So they showed here in these two graphs, this is GPT and this is human rating and then GPT rating. So as the wages increase, the level of exposure increases as well, until we reaches this point here where it's they didn't increase anymore, but as you increase the wages, you get more exposed. So that's something interesting to notice, because in other technological breakthroughs, usually the people more affected is the ones in the bottom of the pyramid, and this time maybe the upper part of the pyramid may be affected. So that's something interesting to notice as well. And remember that affected doesn't mean bad as necessarily bad. It can be your productivity will increase. I don't know, but yeah, as they show in here, probably people with higher wages tend to be more affected than lower wages. And then they talk a little bit about that's something nice to mention as well. The types of knowledge required that are more affected. So according to the study, if your jobs relies much on science and critical thinking, you are less affected than if you work with programming or writing, for example. And then they listed the types of occupations that will be more affected, and the first group here is classified by humans and then by models. So by humans, the most affected ones would be interpreters and translators, survey researchers, and this only by GPT. And the GPT concluded that mathematicians are the most exposed only by Chat-GPT. And then you have something interesting like blockchain engineers. According to GPT, they are very exposed as well. And I don't know, that's nice to, that's interesting later to check this kind of occupations that are more exposed according to each group. And then they talk about a little bit about like, if your job requires some training, you are less exposure than if you don't requires. So like that makes sense, I think, because I don't know, if your job requires some specific training, maybe it's hard for a model to capture this, and so maybe not be very useful. And type of education, like people with higher education seems to be more exposed, which like makes sense considering the wages. People with higher educations have higher wages, so I don't know, kind of makes sense. And let me see if, yeah, I think that was it, like for the results part. And then that's something interesting here in the end of the paper, that there's a discussion that they propose if GPT are general purpose technology. And like they mentioned that to be classified as a general purpose technology, you have to meet 3 core criteria. So improvement over time, pervasiveness throughout the economy, and the ability to respond complementary innovations. So the first criteria was like improvement over time. I think like large language models are improving every month, every week. So you're seeing a lot of improvements. So the first criteria is easily met. Pervasiveness across the economy. Yeah, the study shows that there can be a lot of impact in the economy. So the second criteria can be met as well. And the ability to respond complementary innovations. They say that the complementary software developed around the language models can be considered like as complementary innovations, so that this third criteria is met as well. So like GPT can, according to these 3 rules, GPT can be considered general purpose technology. And yeah, that's it. Like that's the main ideas of the paper. I choose like to not talk a little bit more about the methodology and just like focus on the results and this less discussion here. And I think that's it like for the presentation. If you guys want to discuss about the impacts of the jobs, if you agree, if it makes sense, or this part of GPT be a general purpose technology.
What I think like kind of 15 minutes. So I think maybe what's your conclusions so from this paper?
I don't know. I think it makes sense. I think I don't know, because the adoption of some technology like really depends on a lot of factors, like economic factors. There's people that need to be willing to adopt it, and there's lobby as well. So people don't want to stop doing stuff like the way they used to do. So all of that can like change the impact that they expected by the study. So I think like really depends more on that than, and people need to trust the models. I like ChatGPT has faced a little problems like in the trust community, because like they invent sources when you're doing research, and so I think those stuffs need to be improved. But it was nice to like see a paper that actually tries to measure and gives a number to the impact of the technology that this technology can have. So yeah, and about being a general purpose technology, I don't know. I think I don't have a closed opinion about it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I think like at least for me, I think I was the first thing that surprised me was that like I don't know, like OpenAI, when you think OpenAI and GPT is you kind of think like, oh, something very complex and stuff like that. and their methodology was kind of like the authors labeled the data. They got the data set with the task, and they, oh, let's label the data, and it was kind of simple, right? And then like, oh, and there is the good point, I guess, because like they also tested the capacity of GPT-4, like to do the labeling, right? And they do all that work, like, oh, it agrees with us and stuff like that. But then like they just fit the data. I don't know. I thought it was very not simplistic, but was kind of simple approach, right? They just get the data, the data set, they say, okay, let's break down the task. Hello, you, me, you, Samuel, Pedro, and Guilherme, you label this thing. We also ask ChatGPT to do it, and let's compare the results. Like, I don't know, it looked kind of simple the way they did it, like in a way, like, I don't know, I don't see like other works that they label the data set and they give the results. Uh, but yeah, I think that's this kind of way. Like, I think it was maybe a bit simplistic, like the how they measure the impact. But I think it is a good guideline, right? Because you have the positions, and the position, like the data set of the position, they have like the main tasks, right? So have, oh, this task, he does this, this, and that. And then like some tasks, of course, GPT can help, right? Like all automatize or the exposure thing. But then like I feel in some aspects the work is kind of like they wanted to do something, and then they did that. Like I think like when they do the weighting, like on the alpha, I think like table 2, if you can.
Yes, like it's
Because
it's a little bit strange. Like
yeah,
seems a
like
little bit random. Like why
yeah,
they
yeah,
chose this here.
yeah. This one, like the beta is like E1. That's like E1 is the full exposure. Yeah,
No,
direct exposure.
E1 is only GPT exposure, Chat-GPT exposure.
Yeah, direct exposure. And then like they
Half,
yeah, alpha is just the direct exposure. The gamma would be like the upper end, like like the upper limit of exposure, right? Because then you're considering ChatGPT and other tools, potential tools. But then the beta, they put half on E2, and that's it.
yeah,
I don't know, like they could put anything there, like it's just to average this stuff. Uh, yeah. Yeah, maybe that. But I thought it was funny. Like they just say, okay, we did that. But I think it's good because they give like the other figure that you show, like the how it falls. It's kind of good, like, because you have the upper limit, the low limit, and then you have something in between. But it's kind of like they did that. Like if
yeah.
you consider this, it will fall on that. Yeah, this figure. I like I like okay, but I think like. Yeah, I just think that, but then they did some other work, like they look at other stuff, like the related work, and it was kind of similar. Like they did
Yes,
the comparisons and the regressions. So I think it's a valid work. I think that the way may be a bit odd, but I think it was a valid work, and interesting. I think it was really interesting. But I don't know. One thing that I don't know a bit also bother me is that how GPT thinks that mathematicians are full exposure.
yes.
Like, uh, really,
But
I don't know. I don't think GPT is that good of a mathematician.
I don't know. I think like blockchain engineers being the third more
Yeah,
exposure. It's
yeah, yeah. It
a
was a
little bit
bit,
odd.
yeah, like a bit like, and then like I don't know. I think GPT has some limitations, not even for mathematician, but like as like for arithmetics, like do like, oh, this number plus this number plus this number, maybe you won't give consistent results. And then like a mathematician that has the arithmetics, but also have like how to prove stuff. I don't know. I thought it was funny to me, like, and a bit how, but also the humans, I think it makes more sense, right? So all
Yeah.
interpreters, maybe writers, you could add, the creative writing, maybe a bit, but in regards to exposure, I mean, I do all the time. ChatGPT, I write something, they're like, improve this. So I think it makes total sense. The human labels, the mathematicians, I got like, sounds a bit odd, but I think like. I don't know. I think I like the aspect that they look like, oh, because like, before I think they go into the paper that they say like, oh, like the industrial revolution and all this kind of stuff, like it remove jobs from the low end, like the lower end, like the guy that fixes the bolts. Oh, now you have a machine to do that. And the exposure for ChatGPT is kind of the opposite, right? It goes, of course, you have critical thinking and stuff like that, but it's kind of the most attacks are on the high end that it can't impact, automatize, or improve productivity, right? Because it's not clear. So I think that's the interesting part, right? Because I think also they say like, because some works like manual labor, kind of how you're going like GPT, you have to use artificial technologies, right? I think they go out, they give an example of the barber. The barber, if you don't consider like if you don't weight how important this task is, like they say, oh, the barber would be 90% impacted, but then like the important thing of the barber to cut the hair, right? And GPT can do that, right? I think it's like, but I like the paper because like the paper is from March, right? So like past month, like it was released. And I think like Chat-GPT, if you consider like it was released like what, November, right, last year, and it really, I mean, created this hype, but I think it's also, it has impact. I don't know, at least I guess for you guys as well, that you use like, oh, I need to do something in my code, at least my personal experience, or to write something. It's something that is already impacting, and I think maybe you can think about in the future, right, how potentially that can be, albeit the simplistic and weird approach, at least my opinion, but I think it makes sense. So I think it was really interesting, the reading of this paper.
No, yes, and I think like they use GPT-4 as an annotator only like as an excuse because they are not getting experts to judge every task. So GPT would fill this gap of the experts for every occupation.
Yeah, and I think also makes sense, like if you think like of GPT, like a pseudo Google, right? It's like the thing that have lots of general knowledge. Maybe something gets wrong and stuff like that, but like given the training of the amount of data that it was trained, it kind of have a good amount of knowledge of several stuff, right? So I think and also it's an interesting aspect, right? Like say, oh, you can use this maybe. It's something that I agree with most humans. So maybe in some aspects we could use this as try to help to get more data to automatize. Maybe not fully automatize, but like you say, oh, you agree with humans, so maybe it's a good starting point if you have too much data and stuff like that to do like reduce some stuff. Yeah. And the last part, I think just that I think OpenAI is doing that a lot, but like the conclusions, right? They have the conclusion and then they have the LLM conclusion. That's just showboating. They say, oh yeah, now give your conclusion, GPT-4, and then they just put that's just like showboating to me. But it's funny, right? To see like, oh, the thing can write stuff, right? Can have conclusions. But yeah, I think that's it, like from my side. I don't know like if anyone else wants to add stuff, but it was really, I think it was really interesting. I think I read it on Wednesday or Tuesday, and it was like kind of interesting and kind of like, I don't know, kind of also makes me a bit curious of how will be like in the coming years, like how will be this, like if this it will impact, because some companies like, are they going to really embrace it or no, like, or are people that are really going to see like, oh, it can do this and try to automatize as much as possible and stuff like that. So it's something that makes me wonder. So
yeah, I would just make one point here that I think we can connect this type of evaluation with that open letter that was signed by all the AI grown-ups. Most of the AI grown-ups in the world signed that open letter, pushing for a halt of like 6 months or something in training larger models and refocusing the energy on other stuff. I think this is precisely the type of other stuff that they were talking about. Let's look at the data and understand the social, ethical implications of this new technology. Right? So yeah, like I would really like to see more work being done in this direction, like understanding how these new technologies can impact the world, and I mean, how do we need to adapt? Um, I don't think the priority now, the urgency should be GPT-5. It should be how do we incorporate GPT-4 into the world, like, and without leaving people out of their jobs, without being unethical, like taking biased decisions, jeopardizing certain classes or parts of the population. So I think
That's a good point.
yeah, even though this particular paper may be a little superficial, I think more work needs to be done in this direction.
Yeah, no, good point. Actually, that's a good thing because I didn't see any work like you, because like I like this is more a problem in the United States, right? Because for us it's kind of more homogeneous, the names, but like it's a thing that I remember, not about OpenAI or GPT stuff like that, but about job applications. Like there are guys thinking, oh, let's automatize the CV looking using GPT, and then you get only the interesting candidates. And there's stuff like you have the bias, like maybe like you have like in United States, you have like names like Cliff that are more like white people, and then you have names like Tyrone and Lakeisha. There are more traditionally black names, and then stuff like, would that impact this kind of stuff or not? Because I didn't see any work that have any bias in GPT, because it has like we have works that show this bias in companies, like they have the same CV and they put different names, and they're like, oh, the name that's more traditionally white gets called more often than the name that's kind of black. But for GPT, I think it's something that I never saw that. And it's something I think extremely important, because I think we talk, right, Fabio, have this hype on GPT stuff and people trying to use as much as possible. And then, right, and then maybe we increase the impact that it will have, right? Because people are trying like, oh, let's use GPT because it's the new thing and it's amazing, and it's like it maybe can cause more harm than good in some aspects, because like, oh, it's like it's very good. It has a lot of knowledge given this training data and the ability that it can kind of do this interpolation of teams, right? So you can write how to explain like the Fourier transform in a rep, so they can mix this and explain that in a way that makes sense. But like, I don't know if you try to use this for tests that maybe you don't need to, and then you can have some impacts like fully automatizing stuff. So like, oh, let's block this merchant because GPT says it to block it. I don't know. So to give an example. So, but then again, this is outside the thing of labor markets, right? But yeah, like,
Yeah,
but then you say like, oh, you don't need like analysts to do this. Let's just get GPT and do that. So I think that would be the thing as well.
yeah. In that sense, I think it was good that GPT made some like dumb mistakes, like creating references and inventing some kind of stuff, because people saw that it was not like super intelligence that can answer everything correctly, and then you always can rely on it. So in
Yeah.
that sense, I think it was good because it put some kind of breaks in the exciting of people, that they can make mistakes and usually make mistakes and have to adapt it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like GPT is a large language model. It's not like a brain that knows and has some rationale, right? It gets like the most probable token outputs the text. So it's not like, oh, it's like a computer, I don't know, that has a brain and conscience and stuff like that. I think it's very important for people that work and tend to work with GPT and stuff to have this understanding, right? Because like, oh, I don't need the analyst, I use just GPT. But really, I don't know. I think you lose a lot, right? About this critical thinking part, and also creativity and stuff, right? Because then, like, it'd be like you have several maybe we could change the prompt, but then again, like it would be like the same string of ideas that maybe it would output, So yeah, but I think like of course the impact can be positive, but I think people also need to know how to use it, right? Because I think like I think like we use it currently with Chat-GPT, like how to do coding and have some ideas or improve the writing of stuff. It's very positive, right? But then like say, oh, I don't need this guy. We have our team. Let's cut half of our team and just GPT. I don't know. It can be very harmful that way.
Yeah, I think we are not there yet.
Yeah.